Thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks for, first of all, Rens. Thanks, Petra. Thanks to all the organizers for this wonderful event. I'm really, really pleased to be here. You mentioned a few countries among my origins. I'm actually, my dad is German, from a family in Silesia, which is present-day Poland, was born in Germany, grew up in Vienna. My mom is American from the Bronx, but she's the daughter of a Greek immigrant and a Hungarian immigrant. And I was born and raised in Paris, where I flew from this morning. So yeah, international is indeed part of the DNA. I didn't bring a presentation, not because I'm lazy, but because I want you all to go and check out the website of that I've just devised. I've spent a lot of time on it. Actually, I have a number of hats, different hats, and there was some confusion, I guess, in this in the way I was presented just now. Actually, I founded a foundation called Al Kawakibi a little bit less than a year ago after the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attacks. But actually what I'm here to speak about is a movement and an index that I just started called Youthonomics. The genesis of Youthonomics is quite simple. 3 years ago, as I said, I was born and raised in France. 3 years ago, I started a movement in France called Barrez-vous, which can be translated in English as scram, leave. I don't know how you would say it in Spanish, but in German it would be haut ab. There's a number of other translations. So basically, scram, leave. If you want to say it in a more vulgar way, just imagine. I won't say it here. But so the idea of this movement was very simple. France has now had, as was very wisely depicted just now, Europe as a whole has a problem with youth unemployment, which on average is double the figures of normal employment. In some countries like Italy, it's actually 3 times as many people among youth that are unemployed than among the rest of the population. I was at the time, 3 years ago, looking only at the French situation. And the French situation was that it's been now 35 years in a row that youth unemployment in France has hovered around 25+%. And the only thing that French kids had been doing up until then, most of the time, was just marching. The French have a very good aptitude to march and protest. And they were doing this a lot between various Parisian landmarks, but with little impact on the decisions of policymakers. The basic idea of my co-signatories and I, when we launched this movement, was to say, if the French, and I mean, of course, the French politicians, the political elites, if they are not willing to understand that they need their youth more than their youth needs them, to paraphrase Kennedy, well, maybe it's time that young people start thinking in France, start thinking about going to see what opportunities they can find elsewhere that they cannot find in France. Because, at the end of the day, I would to paraphrase Kennedy, who said once that, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Well, in many countries, your country's not doing much for you. So maybe it's time that you look at what the world has to offer out there. Of course, this annoyed a lot of people in France. The French don't like to think of their land as one of emigration. And so I was accused of being anti-patriotic. I was accused of being anti-French. Now, I was expecting to be accused of such things by the likes of Jean-Marie Le Pen and his daughter, but I was not expecting that people from the business elite would say things like that. And I remember I had a conversation with the head with the head of a big multinational company, who told me, you know, the French kids who stay, they are the résistance. They are the resistance. So, you know, that lets you understand what she thought of the kids who left. So because I was accused of all these things, I just decided, well, what's the best way to prove that actually my beef, my problem, is not with France, it's not with the French, it's with anyone who, you know, doesn't allow young people to flourish. Not because I don't think that this is about, you know, being nice to young people. This is about like being nice to ourselves as a whole. For me, catering, allowing young people to flourish and prosper is not being in favor of young people versus being in favor of older people. I think that societies that don't take good care of their older people are societies that are showing very dangerous signs of decadence. But I do think that there's something specific about taking care of young people that should be very, you know, specifically underscored. When in a family you have the patriarch who's 80 years old passes away, everyone is sad, but it's part of the normal order of things. When a family loses a kid who's 15 years old in an accident, it creates a much, much greater trauma. And so we should be aware that young people need special attention. So I thought hard about what was the best way to disprove these people who were criticizing our movement, and I came to the conclusion that the best way to do that was quite simply to look at the conditions of young people on a global scale. And so I created a think tank called Youthonomics and a global index called the Youthonomics Global Index, which ranks 64 countries across 59 criteria to say which countries allow young people to prosper and flourish and which ones don't. Now, while there are some countries that do particularly well, and again, I haven't brought the rankings because I want you to go and check out the website, there are some countries that do really well, but the general tendency that is shown by this work that we've produced, and we've taken a year and a half with a number of economists from around the world to produce these rankings, is that there is a general callousness towards young people, and things are not going in the right direction. I'll mention three tendencies that I find particularly worrisome. We've found that in many of the richest parts of the world, there is a phenomenon that is appearing for the first time in history. Pretty much since we were hunters-gatherers, so in those parts of the world, we're talking several thousands of years, save periods of famine, periods of plague, periods of war, there has always been a net transfer of wealth from the generation of the parents to the generation of the children. This is breaking down. In this country, we have seen people move back to their parents' place, and then the parents move back to the grandparents' place. So you have the whole family is now living with the grandparents because, quite simply, there's no other way to function. Now, this is completely unprecedented. And in the 20th century, there was a French philosopher, Franco-Lithuanian philosopher called Emmanuel Levinas, who talked about the importance of transmission. And he was talking specifically about the importance of transmitting culture and transmitting values. But what of the transmission of wealth? What happens when a generation figures out that they're not going to get anything, plus they're going to work to pay for pensions, which they will not in their own turn get? I would like to put out there the notion that we have been very much, we've heard a lot about the risk of a shock, of a clash of civilizations, of cultures, of religions. in the 21st centuries, in the 21st century, sorry, I think that we should start thinking about the risk of a clash of generations. I have a 13-year-old son, and when he figures out that what happened between 2007 and 2015 is that basically we took billions and billions and billions of debt that had been accumulated privately by financial institutions and banks. And we decided, because baby boomers were too scared of what might happen if there was a great sort of Bretton Woods operation of getting rid of all this bad debt in a fair way, that we just took all this private debt, accumulated privately, and just converted it into public debt, thereby basically giving the burden of it to pay back to our kids and grandkids and to people who basically are not yet born. They might get pretty angry. I would like to put it out there. Another tendency is that the financial crisis has actually made young people poorer on average, while it has made retirees richer. This is another item that I think is really problematic. The third that I'll just keep, that I'll mention before I move on to more positive things, there is a more positive message here, is that all young people in Europe are financing pensions. Everyone, poor young people, rich young people, everyone's paying for pensions. But the way that the money trickles down from the senior generation to the younger generation is not mutualized. It's inside the family. So that means that we are reproducing inequalities that we purport to have overcome. Because basically, if you're poor, you're paying for pensions of poor people and rich people. If you're rich, you're paying, as a young person, you're paying for pensions of poor people and richer people. But if you're a poor kid, you're getting no money from your poor grandfather. And if you're a rich kid, you're getting loads of money from your rich grandfather. So this is something that we should really think hard about, because this is going to be a problem in the coming years. Now, what's this? So what do we do? Do we just cry all our tears and just go to some illusion, to some wonderland where we all find work and where things become rosy? No, but what we can do is, there is a way that baby boomers and the rest of society, our societies, can turn this vicious circle that's affecting young people into a virtuous one. Politicians don't care about young people because, well, you guys don't vote, or most of you don't vote, or less and less of you vote. You have no more money, and the financial crisis has made you the new poor. The new poor can be defined generationally now. It's a sad thing, but that's the truth. And the third thing is that, well, in many rich countries at least, you represent a shrinking part of the population. So why the hell, as a politician, would I bother to cater to your needs? Well, here's why. No country in the world can prosper without its youth. You have much more power in your hands than you believe and that they believe. If you begin to pack your bags and go to places where you find better opportunities, this will get the attention of politicians in your country. Now, I'm not saying everyone should just, pack their bags and go. I'm saying that the Youthonomics Global Index and other indicators, such as those that were mentioned by the speaker before me, we have to learn from best practices. There are ways that we can do things better in education, in employment policies. I'll mention a few things. In education, Finland is systematically ahead of most countries in the world on all the PISA rankings, etc. Yet, Finland has a cost per capita of education that is lower than most countries in Europe, and certainly of America. Now, maybe what we should be doing is looking at how Okay, I'm going to try to end fast, but this is not going to be easy. Maybe I'll talk about the conclusions maybe a bit later. I can speak to you guys one-on-one, but basically we need to look at best practices and we need to ask our politicians to implement those that work so that we can, you know, get a better so that young people get a better, fairer chance at prosperity and flourishing. In my opinion, in the opinion of the economists that I've gathered around the think tank Youthonomics, young people are a bit like migrants. I know this is a provocative way to put it, but this is what I fiercely think from the bottom of my heart. This refugee crisis that we are seeing unfold in Europe has shown something quite unforeseen. For the first time in history, it's not countries selecting their migrants, it's migrants selecting their countries. They don't want to come to France. They don't want to stay in Italy. They don't want to stay in Greece. They want to go to places where they can get work. They want to go to places where they think they can get a better life. Exactly the same way, in the coming years, young people will flow to the places where they can have jobs and where they can have opportunity. So it's time that we organize a big beauty contest of countries around the world, not just in Europe, so that the countries that give young people the best chance to prosper and success and flourish get the best youth. It's as simple as that. So it's up to us to organize the beauty contest. And for me, the best way that we can get this beauty contest organized is by all lobbying in some form or fashion for our governments to accept the notion of a global youth work visa that allows people under the age of 25 to work for 2 years in any signatory countries as long as they're part of the quota. Thank you so much.